Chapter 9, Muscles and Muscle Tissue. There are 3 types of muscle tissue: smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle is non-striated and involuntary. Cardiac muscle is striated and involuntary, and skeletal muscle is striated and voluntary. Muscle function. Muscles help you be able to move your body because they attach to your bones and contract. Movement of substance within your body. Cardiac muscle moves blood throughout your body, and smooth muscle moves food and waste from your body. Your muscles also help you maintain posture and body position, stabilize your joints, and maintain body temperature. Functional characteristics. Excitability or irritability is the ability to receive and respond to stimulus. Contractibility is the ability to get shorter. Extensibility is the ability to extend or stretch. And elasticity is the ability to recoil back to resting length. Skeletal muscle. The gross anatomy of skeletal muscle. There are 3 connective tissue wrappings: the epimysium, paramysium, and endomysium. The epimysium is the outermost layer that wraps the entire muscle. The paramysium wraps each fascicle, and the endomysium wraps each muscle cell. Each muscle also has at least one nerve and it has a artery and one or more veins. There are multiple different types of attachment. You have origin versus insertion, and the origin is the place that does not move when the muscle contracts, and insertion is where the muscle moves when it contracts. You have direct or fleshy, when the muscle attaches to the bone. And then tendons and aponeurosis. Tendons are rope-like structures, and aponeurosis is a flat sheet of connective tissue. Microscopic anatomy. You have myofibrils and myofibers. Myofibers are the muscle fibers or the muscle cell, and in there you have the sarcolemma, which is the sarcolemma, which is the plasma membrane, the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm, and the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And that stores and releases the calcium. And in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, you have terminal cisternae, which release calcium into the muscle. You also have T-tubules, glycosomes, and myoglobin. A myofibril is what causes the striations, which are the colored bands formed by the arrangement of thin and thick filaments. You have the sarcomere, and then you have different types of myofilament. You have thin filaments, which are actin, tropomyosin, and troponin. And then you have a thick filament, which is myosin, and you have elastic filament, which is titin. Sliding filament theory. So with the sliding filament theory, what happens is the myosin head has ATP come to it, and it goes and grabs the actin to form cross bridges. And the myosin head rotates towards the center of the sarcomere, which is considered the power stroke. And the myosin head binds to ATP, and the cross bridge detachment happens. And then you start back over again. Contraction of the muscle fibers. The steps in the contraction are calcium binds to troponin. The bond between troponin and tropomyosin weakens. Tropomyosin shifts. The binding site on actin is exposed. Cross-bridge attachment. You have pivoting or power stroke. You have the cross-bridge detachment and the myosin reactivation. From step 5 down is also known as the sliding filament theory. Control of skeletal muscle activity. In the skeletal muscle, you have neuromuscular junctions. In this, you have synaptic terminals, which is also, as seen in this picture, known as the axon terminal. And you have acetylcholine and acetylcholinesterase. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter, and acetylcholinesterase is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. You have the synaptic cleft, which is the area between the neuron and muscle cell. And then you have the motor end plate, which is the part of the muscle cell that the neuron sits at and takes all the different neurotransmitters in. Steps in excitation of a muscle fiber. The first part is the arrival of the action potential at the synaptic terminal. And then you release acetylcholine, and then there's binding of the acetylcholine to the motor end plate, and the action potential goes into the sarcolemma, and then you return to the initial state. Excitation or contraction coupling. Action potential runs down the sarcolemma and tubules, and it goes to the inside of the muscle cell. And then the sarcoplasmic reticulum releases calcium ions into the sarcoplasm. Mechanics. Tension versus load. Tension is how much power your muscle generates when they contract, and load is how much weight you're trying to move. There are two types of contraction, isotonic and isometric. Isotonic is where the tension is higher than the load and the load moves. Isometric, the load is higher than the tension and the load does not move. A motor unit is a neuron and one or more muscle cell. The muscle cells are scattered throughout the muscle. Graded muscle response. The ability to control the tension your muscle contracts for each thing. You have change in frequency of stimulus. You have wave or temporal stimulation, which is a twitch sent to the muscles. And you have tetany, which is a hard, solid contraction of the muscle. Change in strength of stimulus. Multiple motor of stimulation. And that's where you bring in more motor units. And then you have trepe, which is the staircase effect. And it's a warm-up or initial, where the initial contraction is not as strong as it can be. And muscle tone is that muscles are always contracted a little bit, and that's what creates the muscle tone. Muscle metabolism. Energy for contraction. It stores ATP, and it only stores 4 to 6 seconds of ATP in your muscles at one time. And then with creatine phosphate, there's 15 seconds worth of muscle power stored. And then ATP generation via respiration. You have anaerobic glycosis and lactic acid, and there's no oxygen, and it makes 2 ATPs for each molecule of glycosis, and that causes it to make lactic acid. You have aerobic cell respiration, which involves oxygen. It's much more efficient, It creates about 36 ATP for each molecule of glycosis. Energy system and sports activities. Aerobic endurance, which is how long a muscle can run aerobically. An anaerobic threshold is a point at which muscles convert from aerobic to anaerobic respiration. Muscle fatigue and contraction. Muscle cramps is the imbalance of ions, and it happens when you run out of ATP. Oxygen debt is when oxygen needed to get rid of the lactic acid you made. And your muscles always also produce some heat. Muscle performance. The force of contraction, and that is done by the number of muscle fibers. So if you have more fibers, it's stronger. The size of the muscle. So if you have a bigger muscle, it's going to be stronger. The series of elastic elements talks about parts of the muscles that don't contract. And the degree of stretch, which is where the muscles work better when they are slightly stretched. Velocity and duration of contraction. You have 3 different types of skeletal muscle fibers: slow oxidative, fast glycotic, and fast oxidative. And you have load, which is less load the faster the contraction, and recruitment. So by adding motor units, you have a faster and harder contraction. An adaptation to exercise means that your muscles can adapt to the different types of exercise so that it can be a slow oxidative muscle. And that increases your cardiac and respiratory. Smooth muscle. The structure of smooth muscle is that it has no striations, contracts like a corkscrew, is uninuclear, and has no neuromuscular junctions, and it's involuntary. The physiology is it has gap junctions, and the calcium helps it contract. Cardiac muscle. The structure has striations, and some cells are branched. The cardiac muscle is the only muscle that can beat by itself, which means that it's autorhythmic. Homeostatic imbalances of the muscular system. Rigor Mortis is where you're stiff, you lack ATP, and last 24 to 48 hours. Myasthenia gravis is a disease where your muscles progressively get weaker, and it's caused by a shortage of acetylcholine receptors. Affects a cure. It blocks ACH receptors, which is acetylcholine receptors, and it's a plant toxin. Disuse atrophy. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. Muscles go away if you don't use them, or they break down. Overuse injury is where you use your muscle too much and it causes it to break down. Muscular dystrophy is where your muscles break down and it's a genetic disease. Sarcopenia is the weakening of muscles as you get older. You can prevent it by exercise and activity. Thanks for watching.